Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of CMO Confessions, powered by On24 and Esco Media. We are so excited to have you here. In this interview series, we speak with top marketing leaders to find out about pet peeves, biggest trends, and of course, the biggest confessions. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo, CEO and Chief Editor at Esco Media. Joining us is our very special guest, Kat Warboys, who is the APAC Marketing Director at HubSpot. Kat, so good to have you on the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Absolutely. Really excited for today's session. So, Kat, let's hear about one confession. I'd love to hear, can you think of a time when something didn't quite go to plan, but maybe there was a valuable learning experience off the back of that?
Just one? Yeah, I could definitely come up with one of those. We'll probably go with something that's probably very recent and fresh. And I think something as leaders, we are continuously having learning experiences in, which is, of course, growing and building teams. Always plenty of lessons to be had there. So in this particular case, I'd been lucky enough to have quite a stable team at HubSpot for quite some years. The people that I joined with 6 years ago in my role were pretty much the same people I was working with up until the end of last year, the start of this year. So that made the team about like 90% of them in anywhere between 4 and 6 years in their experience at HubSpot, which is pretty incredible. And I think a big testament to the type of place that HubSpot is to work. But what that meant was that as they became more senior and experienced within the organization and the real challenges that exist in career paths for very small regional teams, that's another issue we could always dig into, it meant that they were around the same time looking for new opportunities outside of HubSpot. So there was that part to it. The second part was that around the same time, I'd been given quite significant headcount growth, so new seats to fill on the team. So these two factors combined, tenured people going on for new experiences, brand new people coming to the organization, meant that I went from that 90% of people sitting in the 4 to 6 year tenure to actually about 80% of my team now who are under 6 months. So that's quite a flip and quite a challenge, or I guess a different team makeup to adjust to and navigate. Now, I think I was very aware of this at the time, and I certainly put a lot more thought into how I was going to onboard new hires in this new sort of environment. We do a lot of practices at HubSpot around 100-day plans, really focused on making sure people know their roles, their scopes, and to set them up for success during that sort of critical onboarding time. And of course, making sure that the training and new hire class was as optimal as it could be for them. But what I don't think I really planned or expected as much is really understanding the role that team dynamics play for new hires. And it sounds really obvious, but we're not talking about 1 or 2 team members coming on board at a time with a very sort of tenured team existing. We're talking about everybody being brand new. And when 1 or 2 people who are new join, they get the benefit of learning through osmosis. And I think we heard a lot about learning through osmosis during the pandemic, when people understood the value of in an office environment altogether as opposed to online. The same kind of thing was happening with this team. When somebody joins, they're able to look to the rest of the team, join a team meeting call and have a look, observe and absorb the type of psychological safety that's present in that team. They're able to look around and say, hey, how are my peers that I've just joined handling these situations? What's the level of authority that they have on the decision-making process? When everybody is new, osmosis does not happen. There is no ability to look around and see how things have been done when everyone's new. So that was something really big that I don't think I expected or really prepared for. And so off the back of that, I think I quickly realized that what worked for my old team wasn't going to work for my new team anymore. Even just thinking about the frequency of check-ins as a team. We used to have quarterly APAC marketing team reviews going through everybody's work and wins and things like that. I needed to make that monthly. I needed more frequent check-ins for everybody because they were all new, and to really reinforce what was important, focus areas, and what we should be scoring ourselves against. So I had to change a lot of things like that. I think if I was to look back on that now, it would be a lot about lifting my head up a bit more and not just thinking about the individual joining, but really understanding going forward, when somebody leaves or joins, what does that do to the team dynamics? How does that change? Is the seniority mix changing? Did you just lose your A player when it comes to problem solving or creative skills, and how are you going to correct that imbalance on the new team? Yeah, I think that was a massive learning for me in the past, I would say, 6 months.
It sounds like a massive shift in the past 6 months. I'm going to flip the script a little bit because I know a lot of folks who are maybe listening to today's episode are maybe joining a new company. They're maybe in that other side where they've joined And maybe what are some of the advice or tips you would give them in that first 100 days? I know at HubSpot, you guys have a very clear onboarding, but what are some of the things that you think a new hire needs to be successful when it comes to the first 100 days?
Yeah, I think I would flip how I think about setting up new hires, and every organization onboards people differently. So something that I think about a lot for my new hires is, do they have clarity and do they have authority to do their job? So if you're entering a new role and you're a little bit unsure and you're navigating new ways of working, there would be two things that I would focus on a lot. Am I really clear on what success looks like in my role, what my manager thinks is success? That would be the first thing. And the second thing is, what authority do I have to action things? Like, at what level of decision-making ability have I been given? What's the process? Are there sign-offs? Am I meant to be here to create those processes and those sign-offs? So I think those two areas are something when I would go into a new role, I'd be really keen to get a really good grip on early on. I think outside of that, really understanding who your key stakeholders are and who can help you get answers to things in the business. My suspicion is with a lot of turnover in organizations, lots of new people moving, a lot of that IP gets lost, right? A lot of information and context goes with the people leaving. There's a lot of organizations, HubSpot included, who are not fantastic at documenting everything. And so I do think people have to get comfortable with ambiguity, and that many organizations have a lot of new growth at the moment. And how can you best work through that ambiguity? And coming back to that idea of, who are my key stakeholders? Who am I going to be working with? Are there established processes, or should we be recreating those? Yeah, there are a couple of things that I would think about.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I think the identifying key stakeholders is the key one. I think a lot of people underestimate how important that is to getting things done. Like you said, in working with different departments or different organizations, understanding who are the people you're working with, what is their function, and how can you help them. So really great advice so far. Now, I know the event season is upon us and there's tons of trends going around in the B2B space, but I'd love to hear from your point of view, what's a commonly held belief or a trend in your space that you passionately maybe disagree with, or you think is going to be overrated or something like that?
Yeah, good question. There is a lot of, I think in this industry in particular, so much movement, so much advancements, and lots of amazing things that we could be focusing on that it can get hard to know what's going to have impact. I'm also a big believer in the it depends answer. I think most things could work in the right situations when the strategy makes sense, but I know that's not a fun answer. So I guess if I was really pushed to give you something a little bit more maybe controversial, I would say that something that feels potentially maybe not overrated, but overpopularized is ABM. As somebody who has, as my past examples alluded to, been hiring a lot recently and doing a lot of interviews, I hear so much about ABM practices from candidates. And I think it's just getting a bit more attention than potentially it deserves. The reason I say that is because during interviews, people are very excited to talk to me about the ABM strategies that they've implemented. But when I ask candidates, oh, tell me about what improvements did that make to the business? In particular, what's the LTV to CAC ratio in your organization? And they can't answer that. And that's what gives me the bit of the red flag, because ABM typically is quite a costly activity. If we think about true ABM plays, you need quite a high price point or ASP within your organization to justify some of those more costly activities, costly in resourcing and time, or even just budget for some of the tactics that get played out. And so what I really look to understand when people talk about ABM is, what is that LTV to CAC? And are there other ways that we might be able to have a better impact on the organization? And if we have LTV to CAC as a bit of a North Star metric in this scenario, and we start there, we ask different questions. We could ask, as an example, how can we, before jumping to ABM activities, how can we actually impact LTV first off? And we can start to think of lots of ideas around, okay, LTV, we can think about more ways that we can generate revenue for the business. That could be bundling. How do we get customers to sign up to more than just one of our products from the outset? So increasing that lifetime value there. How can we think about reducing churn, for example? And I think marketing's role in this sits a lot around advocacy, building communities and loyalty programs with customer bases. I think we can question how are we helping our customers self-serve support and making it easy when they actually need a human being to come in for support. And essentially, we're just finding out what makes customers successful with us and really orchestrating campaigns or processes and initiatives and programming to support that.
So I can chime in a bit. I'm not getting paid for this, but I know HubSpot does a really good job when it comes to customer advocacy and case studies and success stories and really making the customer the hero. I know that firsthand because I am on the HubSpot website somewhere. I used to be at the homepage of my previous company. And the length in which they ask the right questions, put together the story so it's compelling, is still one of the best examples that I've ever been a part of or seen. And I think going back to your point, what is it that's going to help the customer, but also the business? And I think that's one thing that obviously reduces churn if customers are happy. And it's good from a marketing and awareness point of view as well, too. So I can highlight that from my experience. It's something HubSpot does very well.
That's good to hear. Thanks for that. Can confirm you're not being paid for this.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, the past 6 months, past couple of years have been a real challenge for many marketers. I'd love to hear about some of the biggest challenges that you have solved, say, over the past year.
Yes, good question. I think I'm going to very much put on my regional marketing director hat on for this. You're working in a small regional team. Our sort of goal and challenge equally at the same time is always around how can we drive business growth for the local business here in our market. And a big part of that is doing so in a way that positions us not to just be very present in our market, but very relevant to our audience at the same time. And so that's something I'm always focused on. How do we solve for this within the team? What are we doing to work towards this goal of not just being present, but relevant to our market to help grow the business? And one of the things that the team did in the last 12 months that I thought was just such a great example of this, one that I'm very proud to talk about on their behalf, was a campaign that they executed on called World Certification Week. Now, just for a little bit of context on what this campaign is, it's actually spearheaded by our US team who look after the HubSpot Academy. And HubSpot Academy is our free online learning destination for professionals across the world. It's got short courses all the way through to these more lengthy certifications that can be anywhere between 8 and 12 hours of content with an exam that you take at the end and a certification that you get. And this really sits across topics like social media strategy, how to build an inbound sales motion, inbound marketing, and so on. So a whole sort of range of topics that sit across marketing, sales, and customer success. So that's the Academy. And what World Certification Week aims to do is encourage learners from around the world to really invest in their upskilling by taking one of these certifications. And during that week, and it was in March, if I'm correct, and during that week, every certification that was completed on the HubSpot Academy, HubSpot would donate $5 to a local or a charity of choice. Now, this is something that had been running for a couple of years at HubSpot, but my team certainly saw a ton of potential to localize this campaign in a way that would make it highly successful compared to when we just roll it out as a global campaign with no localization, no local relevancy. And we made the campaign what I would say local in a couple of ways. First off, we just picked local charities that made sense for our audience. Here in Australia, it was the Clontarf Foundation, which works with Indigenous youth. And in Singapore, it was the Halogen Foundation for Singapore as well. So that was the first thing, very simple, just making sure the actual mechanics and structure of the campaign were local. Secondly, to really nail that relevancy piece, we launched quite a big research survey in both Singapore and Australia to really understand what was the state of upskilling in these two respective markets. Now, the insights that came back were really even shocked us. Bearing in mind that this is around the time of the Great Resignation, we were getting insights from this survey that suggested that candidates and the workforce in Singapore as well as Australia actually valued learning and upskilling opportunities more than a salary when looking for a new job. And this was huge because I think it really presented options for smaller businesses that can't engage with wage wars during these periods, an alternative, which was how you developing your people. So the insight from that survey was absolutely massive. So we had that. And with that insight, off the back of it, we decided to launch a new movement, which was called the Great Upskill. And what this essentially meant was that in APAC, HubSpot was giving APAC employees a day to put their tools down during World Cert Week. I think we picked Friday the 13th, to put their tools down and really focus on their upskilling. What could they do to improve their learning development? Something that was going to help them towards their career plans that they had mapped out with their manager. And my favorite thing about this is it was a movement that inspired other brands like Google APAC, as well as Meltwater, Rise, Antler, Skill Finder, other partners as well, to actually join us in that movement. So they saw the value of this during this time. So the reason I love this campaign is there were so many elements of localization. We had research that gave relevant insights in a time that businesses would find this information really helpful. We had a great example of a partnership that was supporting a wider movement. And for my team personally, it was the first integrated campaign that we'd run across the APAC region. And I'm all about trying to get outsized results, which means how can we have more efficiencies in what we're doing across both markets. And of course, the big one, business growth. What we saw was that if we, especially for Southeast Asia, because this is the first time we'd localized World Certification Week in the region, if we compare 2021, the results when it was just a global campaign, in 2022, when we localized it, we saw an 85% increase in the number of certifications completed in the region. So it was a big campaign example, but coming back to your question, I think it really showed that the difference we can make by running local campaigns and really prioritizing relevancy in market, we can have outsized benefits compared to just rolling out global campaigns. And for me, that's what we're here in regional teams to solve for.
Absolutely. I love the story because I'd love to share this with others, because this is a challenge that many marketers, particularly in APAC, face, is a lot of this stuff comes from global and they just copy and paste it to the local markets. And as you said, it may be missing the relevance. So I love the fact that you worked with different local organizations, you did local research, you worked with local partners, and the 85% increase in certifications is a massive kind of result of this. But then I see it as well too, because I think during that time on LinkedIn, I saw a bunch of people sharing their HubSpot certifications. And so it's kind of like this halo effect where you see it from this surface level of the business, and then you see it in the work you guys are doing, and then you see it spreading organically through social and other platforms. So yeah, I love this. Obviously, I'm in education, so I think it's something that, once again, HubSpot does extremely well. I sound like a HubSpot fanboy, but I would say this, even if you are the show, I think it's a great initiative.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think localization is key. It's a big topic. It's one like I'm pretty passionate about. And something that you mentioned earlier is how we work with our customers as well. And we're like seeing this in other areas, the power of both not just localizing activity in the business, but using our customers. The team started experimenting with advertisements. I think it was late last year, we were running podcast network advertisements. And instead of having an American accent reading the ads to our Australian audience at the time, we actually got a customer to do the ad and could obviously link the product that we were advertising back to results that they'd seen in the business. And I wish I'd looked up the results ready for this conversation, but the improvement from just the voiceover versus a customer, an Australian customer at that, talking to results was massive. And I think it's these little experiments that in the past year have really helped lift this conversation, not just at HubSpot, but in the way we're talking about it just in region with other marketers of some global companies that have regional teams here, why localization is so important. And it's really great to be able to start having metrics that kind of really back that up now.
Yeah, it's an interesting story in terms of the accent. I imagine also because it is a real person. A lot of companies, they tend to hire voice actors, professional kind of actors, actresses to do this. But the fact that you have your customers voicing it is actually quite cool. I'm sure they were very happy to see it go live as well, too. It's, oh, that's my voice in your HubSpot ad.
Yeah, and in the same light, like it's actually, there's something more in it for the customer. So you gave a wonderful compliment earlier about case studies, which I really appreciate. But I think there's ways that we can elevate the customer in that as well. Case studies often, for me at least, seem very self-serving to the vendor, right? Yes, your product helped me do X, Y, Z, but what's way more interesting is and that typically lives on the website of the vendor, doesn't tend to get huge reach or impressions. If we are actually taking that to advertising platforms, I, as the customer, am getting to share the great work and growth that my business is having, not just on HubSpot's website, but now actually with everyone that listens to X podcast and really get that visibility that wasn't offered before in the more traditional way that we think about case studies. So I think there's so many wins, not just for the brand, but also the customer when we kind of elevate the narrative, but also the platforms that we're sharing these customer success stories with.
That's actually a really good point because, like you said, most companies just host it on their own website. But if you think about the kind of work involved for the customer as well, too, because they have to answer questions, there's a little bit of back and forth to make sure everything is signed off. So there is a little bit of like legwork they have to do. So, you know, that extra exposure, that extra awareness you can give them on these different platforms is definitely going to be super helpful for them individually, but also for the brand, too. So I like that idea. And like I said, I don't know of too many folks doing that. So it's some good insights for everyone watching and joining us today.
Nice.
And yeah, so thank you. Appreciate sharing that. And guys, as always, if you have any questions, let us know in the Ask the Question tool. We're happy to answer it. Otherwise, I've got a few more for Kat I'd love to hear. Now, this is a topic that continues to come up time and time again, is this cross-team alignment. And I know you're very passionate about it, and not only helping organizations grow, not only bigger, but I guess better. So what advice would you give for other marketing leaders when it comes to cross-team alignment? Some of the key learnings from your space.
Yeah, this is a big topic. I think we probably do a whole session just on this, but I think just to come backwards, step back a little bit on what you said around how do we grow better. This is something that you'll hear a lot of people at HubSpot saying. It's part of our company mission is to help millions of organizations to grow better. It might be worth just touching on what do we mean by grow better, and therefore where does cross-team alignment come in? Grow better is really this idea that goes against growing bigger simply for growth's sake. And our co-founder says that far more eloquently than me. Damesh actually says he doesn't like growth for growth's sake. So what does that mean? It means essentially growing for numbers. Are you, and your numbers might be going up really fast, but I think, why is that? Are you the only option in a brand new category for people to pick from? And what happens the minute a competitor with a better customer experience comes along? Chances are those numbers are going to slow, but you're also going to see churn pretty quickly. So growing bigger is really about companies that are solving for their bottom line above all else, and often at the expense of their customers. When you think about growing better, does so in a way that actually builds loyalty with your customers as you grow and creates a more sustainable business. So I think that's a really important distinction to make, because we often throw that around a lot at HubSpot, grow better, but what does it mean? And when it comes to customer experience, which is the key of growing better, cross-team alignment really is king. When I first joined HubSpot 6 years ago, I did so in a sales enablement role. So I feel like I got a lot of insight early on to the benefits that can be had when, in this case, marketing sales are very closely aligned. It's a lot of work. A lot of the time you're trying to align on goals and why it's the right outcome and rally people around something. But the impact, which is often what's felt by the customer, it's often things like a smoother transition between being on the website and actually getting in touch with the salesperson. The impact of that sort of process becoming a lot more smoother is huge. I was really seeing that from the early days when I joined HubSpot. I think Yamini, our CEO, talks to this really well when she talks about cross-team alignment. And the way she describes it is, in business, there's a bit of an art and science when it comes to customer experience. And she refers to art as your culture. So you need to have a really good culture orientated around the customer. And then you have your science, which is like more your disciplines. And one of those disciplines she talks to is around aligned teams. Now, we were really lucky at HubSpot in that we were so dedicated to the customer that we aligned all of our teams, customer-facing teams, marketing, sales, and customer success, under our chief customer officer. And when you do that, the flow-on effect of people being more aligned around the customer in their strategy as a result is massive. It made a big difference. And I'm not saying HubSpot is perfect, but there was a real turning moment, I think, for us when that move was made. That made a huge difference to getting teams aligned. But not everyone will have a chief customer officer. I think that is actually, on another note, a really interesting growing role that we're seeing in APAC. But not everybody has a chief customer officer, and not everybody will be able to align those customer-facing teams under their chief customer officer. So I still think there's a lot marketing can do in this space. I would really recommend marketers to take time to really analyze what are the handoffs and transitions that happen in your customer's journey with you, from when they get to the website to when they want to talk to somebody, or even more to the point when they don't want to talk to someone and they want to self-serve these days. How does that journey play out? Is it smooth? Is it easy? Or is it cumbersome? Do I have to call 5 different people with my query and give the same data 10 times? So I think really digging into that and understanding how can automation help us solve for some of these transitions is something marketers can really add value in. The other part is really assessing, or maybe thinking about having what we call an ease scale. So really rating your business on how easy it is to research from, how easy it is to buy from, and to get support from. So these are the key areas that today's customers really want to have ease around. And so I think marketers can actually do a lot in terms of rating themselves on this spectrum. It does bring up a lot of questions around, is this all marketing's responsibility? And the answer is no, but we're in a really unique position. As platforms and technology has built out, we're finding that a lot of these automation functionality does sit within the marketing automation tools that we're using. And it's giving us a lot of leverage to improve handoffs and transitions in the business and within this particular regard.
Yeah, I love the ease scale. I love it if you could share a little bit more. You mentioned ease of doing research, ease of buying from, ease of getting support. How are you guys doing that at HubSpot? You can share just a little bit.
Yeah, we think about this in a few ways, like easy to research. We've recognized that, buyers aren't going to brands to get their information anymore. It's part of it, but it's not all of it. Today, we see customers going to their peers beforehand. They're going to review sites. They are going to just about everywhere except your brand website when they want to make a decision. So that is something we recognized. And I say we, I think some very smart people at HubSpot recognized quite a few years ago and really invested in things like the academy, as I explained earlier, understanding that when people are making decisions of what technology they want to go with, they need education. So how are we building an ecosystem that supports that? And how are we bringing on ambassadors and influencers in the industry who can also help educate and align with our brand? So there's a lot of plays going around community, influencer marketing, and of course, customers. Customers' word of mouth is still a key way in that people make their decisions. So that's a huge part to the ease of research. How are you working with all of these external channels to make sure that people are supporting your brand and can research it from the places that they go to today? To buy from is a big one. Increasingly, people want to be able to self-serve. A lot of the time, people don't want to talk to a salesperson. They've done all that research. They know. They actually just then want to buy. So we spend a lot of time making that as easy as possible for our customers, whether that is signing up for a free trial, getting started, touches. We've been investing a lot in that area. Not every purchase requires a demo or a rep. We've got a product suite that really ranges from just getting started with your email and automation tools all the way through to, yes, more enterprise products. So I think it's really about matching the sophistication of the tools with the level of sophistication that buying process needs to look like. And then I think get support is just equally the same. We've found some interesting data at HubSpot where on-site chat was the preferred way that our customers get support from us, which I think is really interesting. Again, they're not necessarily wanting to talk to a human, but maybe even a bot. And so a lot of investment, again, went around, okay, I think we learned that something like 70% of the queries we get on-site chat for support are our frequently asked questions. They are so easy to self-serve. So this is where chat can be extremely effective. If an organization just wants to bring in, you've probably already got an FAQ page, but translate that into a bot to help customers get the answer they need very quickly. And what that enables off the back of that is freeing up our customer success team's time for them to focus on those harder, more complex cases where, more support is needed and maybe a follow-up call. So getting support, again, how do we make that easy for the frequently asked questions, things that a customer can solve with just a support article versus actually needing to put them in touch with a support specialist. So they're just a few things around those three areas people would think about.
I love it. Super practical framework, I think, for everyone watching, listening. I want to get to your career, but I want to answer some of the questions from the audience first off. So Sheila asks, to what extent should you localize without losing your brand identity? Typical localization practice is sending translated emails, or as Kat mentioned, using local customers to do voiceover. There are countries who would like to add the local flavor, but doesn't align to the company brand. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So, I think our jobs as marketers are to represent our brand, and I'd be really interested to know what type of localization they're looking at that doesn't necessarily align to the brand. We think about brand, it's often tone of voice, it's often sentiment and the goal that the company has and the values they exhibit. So the type of, activities that I would certainly engage with at a local level, I can't see necessarily conflicting with brand and our brand strategy. So I'm interested to know if us can maybe send some of the examples. But yeah, I do think we think about localization in a very limited way. A lot of the time it's, I just need to translate, from English into whatever language I'm working in within my market. And there are so many more meaningful ways to have contextual localization. And I think particularly I'm based in Australia, even though I work across the APAC market, we don't have language from our US central brand team as an issue. We have relevancy, whether they're launching campaigns that are referring to the summer holidays when we're in the thick of winter, as an example, right? A lot of things that if they're not caught can actually land very tone deaf on our audience, even be seen as insensitive. So we found lots of other ways just to make sure that the right language is used, and if we can be bringing customers, which is the best way for us to showcase local brands. Partnerships is another fantastic one. If you've got great brands within your region that aren't necessarily global but are well known, what are those partnership opportunities to team up to serve your common goals? But yes, I don't think I would recommend going against any sort of brand value, anything like that within the activities. I'm not sure if that was helpful because I don't think I fully understood the question, but yeah.
I love the summer break example. Coming originally from the US and living in Asia for 15 years, I can definitely see how that would be led quite poorly over here. Thank you so much, Kat. JL asks, how can the marketing function present the effectiveness, in brackets, ROI, of their results for their initiatives, particularly to the CFO?
Yeah, ideally, depending on the initiatives, right, we are all aligned behind a common goal, whether it's demand gen, whether it's brand awareness. I think tracking success and having really clear goals and KPIs is extremely important. If we as marketing leaders can't define those for our team and find a way to measure, I think it would throw into question, why are we doing this? To present, I would say to any of your stakeholders, it's really understanding whether it's the CFO, whether it's the CEO, CCO, whoever, what's important to them, and really tailoring your metrics and your activities around that and your audience. I think it's a big question. A lot of it comes back to our capabilities and what technology we have to prove ROI on marketing. And the activities are so broad, from our sort of harder activity at the brand and awareness level. Not every company can afford brand awareness surveys to understand if they're winning over share of voice and things like that. But I think there's ways around that. For a very long time, I've worked in companies where we did not run very expensive brand survey data to understand how we were winning here, but having benchmarks, like what does good look for us and how do we know where we're starting to see a lift? So in the area of awareness, we weren't using influencers before and we are now. What additional reach is that getting us that we weren't having before? So for me, it's all about uplift. It's all about the year-on-year growth of the impact of the activities that we're having. But I can appreciate that sometimes we don't have the tools or budgets to measure some of these things. So it's just like, how can we show this? How can we get creative around a particular goal? And I think the brand awareness survey is probably a good example of that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier at the very beginning in terms of understanding your role. I guess also understanding the KPIs for the team and the organization as well, too, because you have to know, especially when you're just starting out, what is it that you're working towards? I've been in roles where it's very fuzzy, didn't really know, and so that made my job very difficult to really navigate and understand where I need to prioritize and where I need to focus. So I think it always kind of comes round circle. So I appreciate you sharing that, Kat.
Good.
Let's move a little bit towards your career, because I know a lot of folks who are joining us today are maybe on the more junior side and they want to aspire to be where you're at. So can you share a little bit more about your journey to becoming an APAC marketing director?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't study marketing. That's probably one thing to put out there. My studying did not start in that field at all, which actually gave me a lot of doubt as a marketer over the years, that I didn't come from this marketing degree. So I had a lot of doubt for a long time on that. And I know a lot of people that get into marketing that don't necessarily follow that study path do. So I actually started out by studying international tourism business at uni in the UK. And I quickly left the UK after that because I do not agree with cold weather, and I ended up in Australia. My first role was in an agency, and this was a good at least 10 years ago now. And we were one of the first, I think, agencies in all of APAC to be a Marketo partner. So Marketo is one of the marketing automation solutions available in the market. And so the role really was to onboard clients using Marketo and help them set up CRM strategies and automation strategies. What was interesting back then, that this was all very new then, and the challenge I faced in my role was working with organizations where marketers had just been told, right, you've got this new piece of technology and you're going to do something called nurturing and automation, and I want to see the impact of the events that you're having, and you're going to be building landing pages in the email, and there's these drag and drop editors, but they don't really work, so you're probably going to need to learn a little bit of code or get a developer. And it was just such a big at that time in what marketers were used to doing. And it made my job interesting. I think sometimes there was a lot of resistance to this change, but it was really at the forefront of kind of marketing automation coming into play, which is really interesting to be a part of. I left the agency and went and worked with a company called True Alliance. And in Australia, they have the rights for a bunch of retail brands that many people would be familiar with, like the North Face, Reebok being an active brand, UGG, the clothing line. There was about 15 different retail brands that they were responsible for. And my role there was a CRM manager. So really going in and helping them and all these brands work out what was their strategy and what data did they need to support that. How were we going to collect and store that data? How are we going to start to do really data-driven smart campaigns? And again, that was like a really exciting time in the industry where I think like abandoned cart emails were just coming out as being like the latest thing that you could leverage, which seems so crazy now. But yeah, building a subscriber list was what everybody was talking about, and automation and things like that. So again, like really fun time to be part of that industry. Once I left there, I actually came to HubSpot, and that's where I've been now for the last 6 years. I've done everything that a lot of people in regional roles will be familiar with, from sales enablement to just traditional field marketing, running events, all the way through to media as well. So I've worn quite a few different hats since I've been at HubSpot. And yeah, as of about a year and a half ago, I was promoted to my current role as APAC marketing director. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. I've seen a lot of change in industry, a lot of acceleration when it comes to technology. As I said, starting out in that marketing automation space, but quickly seeing like sales enablement and productivity tools coming onto the scene, and now payments. So it's been really colorful in that way to see the explosion in this space.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a journey, and congratulations on the promotion. If I have that correctly, you were the first female APAC marketing director at HubSpot?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. When I was promoted, we had not had a female director in the APAC region. So yeah, that was quite a moment. Something I actually wasn't really I wasn't aware of until it was explained to me. And I was like, oh, wow. And I think that says a lot, but I think it says more about where we've come, because since then I'm now joined by 4 directors in the APAC region who are female. So I think HubSpot very quickly realized where we have our weaknesses in this area. We publish a diversity report every single year that really puts our hands up and say, look, we need to do better in these areas. And so I think that's a huge testament. In the space of a year and a half, we went from 0 to 4 female directors in the region, which is great for me. But yeah, that stat was correct.
Just want to double check, because I know we have a lot of great female leaders joining us as well today for today's episode. Was there anything in particular you had to navigate? And was there anything, like you said, you probably, as you mentioned, weren't aware of it until someone highlighted it to you, but did it feel different when you became the director level role, the first one?
I certainly noticed it when I joined meetings with my counterparts. So the other APAC directors did feel at that point, I'm the only woman in this room. This is really interesting, and navigating that. But those people in that room were the very champions I had who helped me get my promotion. So there was a lot of support. There was a lot of welcoming environment for me, which was fantastic. And it was a change. I do think as a whole, women doubt themselves a lot more than men. I'm starting to question that recently. The more people I speak to about this, a lot of guys will be like, no, I've got so much doubt and I've got so much imposter syndrome. Oh, maybe we just talk about it more. But yeah, I think there's a lot of doubt. And I've been a big believer in having like a circle of very select few people that you go to during these times. They're people that when you are faced with tough decisions or challenges, they're going to have your back. And it can't be everybody that you work with. And the reason for that is there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like the decision that you're making. Decisions are hard, and they're hard because there's always somebody that tends to not get the most optimal outcome for themselves out of it. And so if you open up everybody into your feedback circle, you're always going to be disappointing somebody. Pick that circle carefully. It should probably be your manager. It should be people that have the traits that you're trying to develop in yourself, or that you just really trust their guidance and may be an aspirational leader to yourself. And so having that circle has, throughout my career, that's not something new that I implemented when I was a director, but something that I've used along the way, has really been invaluable for me. It just helps me have that boost of I'm doing my best, I'm thinking about this in the best possible way, and the people that I really respect and admire have my back and are saying just the same. Having those champions, but also championing yourself, is really important. My role now that I have now was empty. There was no one in it for about a year until I pitched for it. So I also think championing for yourself. We talk a lot about career development at HubSpot, and I think 2 things really need to be present. There has to be a business need, and there has to be readiness in the individual who's going for the role. And you can, to most extent, impact both. I was very active in making the case for the role and then presenting why I felt I was the right candidate for that. So just wanted to mention that I think champions along the way are so important, but championing ourselves is equally as important. It gives the leadership the confidence that you are the right person if you're back in your corner as well.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to imposter syndrome, and I think regardless of your gender, it's good advice in terms of raising your hand and championing yourself, because you said hopefully you have people internally who can do it, but it may not always be the case in the organization. So sometimes you'll do it for yourself. So I think it's a good reminder for many of us who want to move up in our career to champion for ourselves, raise our hand, and like you said, showcase why you're the best person for that job. So thank you so much for sharing that. Awesome. We have a couple more questions from the audience, so we'll get to those and then we'll wrap it up with the lightning round. So Denise asked, how do you balance advocating for ourselves with helping others grow? Interesting question.
I think you can do both at the same time. I think advocating for yourself in a humble way, and often that is in our positions, making sure the people on our team get the credit for the work that they did. Our roles where we can advocate for ourselves should be in how we're empowering our teams, supporting our teams, growing our teams, turning those B players into A players. Like that, in my particular role, is what I should be focused on and dedicated to showing that I'm doing daily. The work itself, the great campaigns that I shared today, World Certification Week, came off the back of my team's hard work, great ideas, their innovation and collaboration. So the two almost go hand in hand. If you're empowering your team, you in turn are showing that you have those skills to foster creativity, to give people the reins, to not have that team fall apart should you be away. I actually was just on a sabbatical and I had to leave my team for 5 weeks, and I think a lot of people fear that their teams will fall apart without them. I don't think that's a great sign that you have given your team enough autonomy or authority to do their roles without you. So there is a balance to that, showing that you are a leader and add value to your team without stepping on your team's toes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I think you have been a testament throughout even today's conversation where a lot of leaders, if I asked them about their biggest accomplishments that they've talked about, they would say, oh, I did this, I did that. Whereas you have went and talked about, here's what the team did, here's what my partners have done, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it all comes through the way you act, the way you communicate. As you said, when you are elevating your team, you're actually elevating yourself as well, too, because as the head of the department, if your team does well, then you do well as well, too. So Denise, very good question. And Kat, great response. Really appreciate that. Guys, if you have any more questions, let us know. Otherwise, I have a few lightning round questions for Kat. So first question is, what resource has had the biggest impact on your career?
Working with smart people, for sure.
Awesome. What's your most successful marketing channel or tool?
So I would have to say, and unfortunately, I'm not the brains behind this, but the HubSpot blog, HubSpot coined the term inbound marketing, and I think we've really walked the talk on that. The HubSpot blog is responsible for something crazy, like 70-80% of our demand every month. It receives about 7 million monthly visitors every month. So it is a huge engine when it comes to content creation and demand. That's definitely one of the tools. And then the second one, like I know you said first, but equally powerful is on-site chat. As I said earlier, that is the preferred way that our customers get support from, and actually is, as it turns out, probably the best way for us to provide support at scale to customers. So those two most effective tools.
Awesome. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier in terms of ease scale, so ease of research. Now, I know a lot of people, when they're on the HubSpot blog, they may not be doing research about maybe HubSpot, but they're doing research about inbound marketing or social media. So the fact that you guys are so easily able to access information on SEO, it ranks very well, does by and large help the ease of research. And then you talked about the chatbot in terms of the ease of buying from. So if they're able to get their answers question immediately versus going through a form or going through a salesperson, then that obviously helps as well too. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Everything's coming full circle in our conversation. Another thing I'd love your thoughts on is, what brands do you get inspiration from? I'd love to hear that.
Yes, I have a whole list. I think what the common thread between them is I love learning about brands who are winning because of the customer experience and how they're disrupting that within their industries. Like, again, full circle back to the ease. It really is, I think, key to how businesses win today. It used to be what you sell. Now it's about how you sell, right? And that's a lot to do with the ease. So I love when I see a brand come along that is solving for that and purely winning because they're disrupting based on customer experience. If I was to give an example of this, I've been reading a lot about Caro at the moment, and I think they're one of those brands that have come in and realized, wow, this whole process of getting a car can be done in 5 minutes. And that is the kind of disruption that is winning customers over. If you can take that pain out of my day, if you can help me do and achieve what I want to do in less time, that is incredible. And there's lots of brands on that list for me, but I'm giving one today. Caro would be up there as replicating that model for sure.
Another great soundbite. It's not what you buy, it's how you sell. Sorry, it's not what you sell, it's how you sell it. I love that as well, too. If you had 10x the budget you have now, what would you spend it on?
People. I think really smart people can do a lot with not a lot of money.
Awesome. What are the marketing KPIs your CEO is looking at regularly?
Yeah, definitely our marketing SLA, which is all centered around the number of QLs that we generate and the amount of MRR that contributes from those QLs to the sales team is definitely up there, as I'm sure most people joining today would have that SLA in place as well. But interestingly, and again, going back to things we talked about today, our CEO was our CCO. So she was promoted from Chief Customer Officer to Chief Executive Officer, and she still cares very deeply about the customer. So another KPI that's super important to her is social proof and how we're working with our customers and advocacy, which is great.
Awesome. Last question is, if you could ask one question to 100 of your peers, what would you ask them?
What was your best customer experience?
Interesting one. Do you have one off the top of your mind? Anything that comes to mind in terms of your best customer experience recently?
Yeah, I do actually. I had to share one at a conference not too long ago. So about 6 months ago, my husband and I rescued a dog. We adopted a dog, and it was meant to be one of those, we'll just go and have a look and meet him, which is just, once you meet a dog, you're going to walk home with him. So that's exactly what happened. We met Bruno, and he's super cute, and decided to bring him home. And very quickly, it was like, oh, we didn't realize that would happen so quickly. And now we need dog treats and toys. And so a lot of people have been telling me about a brand in Australia called Waggly. Now, Waggly do pet subscription boxes, which is very, very over the top and a bit indulgent, but they will basically, you fill out a 5-minute survey and they ask you questions like, what breed is your dog? How active is your dog? Any dietary requirements, any dietary preferences, whole spectrum of things. They know a lot about Bruno by this point. So I filled out all that information, and a week later, customized dog box of treats and toys and things for Bruno arrived, which was awesome. So I was like, that was very cool. That was very easy. Did the whole thing in a couple of minutes and problem solved. But it turns out that this company, Waggly, are actually owned by a company called, now Mad Paws do pet services, dog sitting, those types of things. So that was fantastic because, again, we were having a trip coming up and I knew I'd be away. So quickly, within a space of about 2, filled out my details of what I needed. I needed somebody to come look after Bruno on these dates. And I was connected with about 3 dog walkers in my area, which is actually pretty good because I live in a rural part of Australia. So I was like, this is amazing. And then thirdly, by this point, because they had so much information about Bruno, they were able to serve up pet insurance for me. So in the space of, I would say, easily 15 minutes, this brand had very quickly been able to serve me the dog treats and supplies that I needed, followed by a dog sitter, and then finally pet insurance without even leaving my seat or my home, because for me, a lot of those services are about 30-minute drive away. So I think coming back to those examples of using information that's being collected, so that's something actually we didn't get to talk much about, but I think if you're providing a company data, how are they using that data to help you further down the line? And very quickly after they found out a lot about Bruno in that first step, they were able to use that and let me know and recommend these other services. It's the point that when I got to the pet insurance stage, I didn't have to fill in the same information again. They had it all. I literally was presented with the best options and had to pick select and go through to payment, and that was it done. So I thought that was pretty awesome to have those range of services in a bit of a one-stop shop and be able to go through that whole process in, as I said, like 15 minutes.
Wow. I'm sure the fellow dog owners here are going to love that story as well, too. So, Pat, thank you so much again for today, for coming on the show and sharing all your stories and insights. I found it super valuable, so thank you so much.
No, thank you. It was really good to have a chat. I hope it was valuable to everyone. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you so much for joining today's session. We really appreciate all the great questions and all the engagement. We love it. Obviously, a big thank you to On24 for putting this whole shindig together. And if you liked it, today's episode, feel free to check out the CMO Lounge. There's a link area down below where you can check out our previous episodes. So thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next episode of CMO Confessions. Take care, everyone. Bye, guys.